Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I do a lot of loading for 9mm, and I probably don't go through as many rounds as a lot of people do, maybe a lot of other competitive shooters, but I do seem to go through 1,000 rounds really quickly, like it's nothing. So I've been doing all my loading on what is right back where you guys are sitting here, my Hornady single stage press. That just takes a really long time to do every single operation separately, having to pull the shell off of the shell holder and put it back on for each operation. It just takes a really long time. So I decided it was time to get a progressive press, but I didn't want to spend quite as much money as, say, a Dillon 650, 750, 1050, something like that. Though I would love to have one of those someday, it's just not in the cards for me right now to be able to spend that much on a progressive press. I have decided to set this press up exclusively for 9mm. I could, and I may in the future, get a separate turret head and do 223 on it as well, but for now it is strictly for 9mm. I got this press on sale for around $260, and that included everything you need to do full progressive loading, including primer feed, case feed, powder dispensing, all of that. It is the lowest price progressive press that does all of this that there is. And if I haven't said yet, this is the Lee Loadmaster 9mm. It is a cast aluminum framed press. This thing is definitely super finicky to set up, and it's going to take lots of cussing and frustration before you get yours dialed in just the way you want it to, if you do have one of these or happen to purchase one. It is set up to do things kind of the cheapest way possible, and there are some things on it that just kind of work a little bit, let's say, jankily. They don't, it's kind of almost like a Rube Goldberg reloading machine contraption, if that makes any sense. There are some things that aren't held in place the way I'd like them to. Some things aren't quite as straight and lined up as I'd like them to be. And this press and the setup of it took me several hours to dial in and get figured out. And I'm still maybe not there as much as I'd like to be. Because of that, I want to go through a little bit and show you guys how the press works in each individual operation that it does. When I was setting it up, I kept having to take a break, look on YouTube, pause stuff to get just the right frame to see how stuff was supposed to be set up, and there wasn't a video that I found that really showed how everything worked in each individual step, and that's something that I really wished I could have found. For me, if I can see how something works, I know how to put it together, I know how to tweak things to make it run decently. So I'm going to start by taking a lot of the major components off of here. I'm going to kind of strip it down a little bit to almost just how it comes in the box, and we're going to get up close on the press, and I'm going to show you each individual case loading operation. I'm not going to show dialing in the settings on the individual dies, though I'll probably mention a couple of them a little bit. You pretty much set up the dies just like you would on any other press, and we have covered that in the past. So I'm going to strip this down a little bit, and we will come back in a second and get it set up again. Alright, with a little camera finagling, I think I've got you guys in where you can see stuff. So I've stripped the case feed system off, which is going to let you see this side, and I pulled the primer tray out. As it comes from the factory, it is just like this. The handle is installed, all of this is installed, the actual primer feed system itself is already installed. First, I'm going to go over how it works to index, and let's even get in here a little bit closer. So you should be able to see all this in here. Now, the entire indexing system works on this rod right here that slides in and out. And let me show you. All right, so there is a plastic surface right here that rides on this metal edge right here. And that is how the entire indexing process works. When the ram goes up, this little flipper thing right here hits this bar and tips in like that. Then when this gets down here, that plastic rides on the metal, and as it goes down, it pulls straight back like that. Now, this was the first reason that when I was looking at how this press worked and how it indexed, I thought, man, this thing is janky. This bar just floats in a little notch in there. You can see the press index when I pressed it in. Let me run this through a cycle real slow so that you can see how it works. So it goes up. When it gets to the top of the stroke, that little lever flips a little bit. When it gets down to here, pushing the press down binds things up in this direction because of how it's set up, but it does pull this bar out so that you'll feel that bind as it comes down, and it's weird, but it does come out. Then we'll get to this nub right here, which kicks the bar out, and that actually moves it to the next ratchet position on the underside of the shell plate, which we'll look at. Then when you get to the bottom of the stroke, the actual press arm contacts the back of this rod right here and pushes it forward and in, and that's what does the indexing. Because this thing is free floating, it can just fall out at any point. How it doesn't, I don't know. Somehow they have figured out a way to actually make this work. Now, when I bought this, everything was so bound up, I actually had to pull this out of here with pliers. I could not get this to move. It would get to here and then absolutely freeze right here. It would not budge whatsoever. I had to loosen things up, smooth things up, and oil the crap out of the inside before this would actually move past that point at all. But right now you can see it's working really smoothly. And that, like I said, that did take a lot of dialing in to get there. Let me actually take apart this top plate and I'll show you what's going on underneath. So there's just a little nut right here that screws on, then an O-ring, and actually I'll pull the O-ring off with the case ejector, which is this plate right here. Okay, that's out of the way. You can see I'm a little oily in there. Then, oh, you do have to have this indexing rod thing taken out in order to take this shell plate out, and it's kind of a pain in the butt to get out of there. But now we should be able to lift this shell plate out, and you kind of got to tip it past the primer feed system. Alright, so here is the bottom of the plate. When it turns, you can see how that works. Lines up on there, pulls back, then this moves to the side and gets ready to push it around again. You can see on this bar how we've got a big old scratch in there, and that's because there is nothing keeping this moving except the oil inside there, and it's just flopping around, and it tends to grab onto that cast aluminum material on the inside here and get really bound up if you don't have it worked in smoothly. While we've got it apart here, let's dig into the priming system right here a little bit and see if I can show you how that works and how you can avoid some trouble in the future. I had all kinds of trouble with this priming system, getting this set up. I don't know, yeah, you can see this lever over here, and the actual priming pin that comes up. How that works is the ram comes up. On the top of the stroke, there's this bolt right here that sticks down. That bolt is adjustable. It's just got a nut at the top, and I can show you that on the other side here. Here we go. We've got this bolt in a hole in the press here, and it's just locked in with a nut. And this bolt does all of the adjustment on the primer seating depth. When you raise the arm, when you raise the ram all the way to the top, this lever right here is pushed down by that bolt, which in turn raises the actual priming bar right there. So you can see how that works. Getting that dialed in was a pain in the butt. Okay, let me take this apart the rest of the way and show you a few other things. All right, so to get this out, we're going to need a screwdriver. And it's unhandy because you can't come at it at this screw from either this way or this way straight on. Almost have to have a little stubby screwdriver, but it's not in there very much. This screw is in one of the 4 case guides that's around the edge, and when we actually go to running through cases later, I'll show you exactly the function of these. But for now, I'm going to take this one out. And I'm going to try to be careful not to drop any of this stuff here. Okay, so I've got a washer, the case guide, and the screw here, and I'm going to set those to the side. Now that will let this, well, it'll almost let this priming arm slip out. I'm going to actually move this other case guide to the side just a little bit. That should let the whole thing pop out, and it does. So this is the primer feed system. How it works is the primer feed tray sits in it right here. The primers come down this shaft. Then this is actually case actuated. So this moves back, lets a primer fall down in, and then at the top of the stroke, this little bar right here runs into this back here, or maybe it's, I don't remember which part it actually contacts. We'll look at that later. But it moves this forward again and pushes a primer under the case. This system doesn't work particularly well, and I've had probably 25 rounds out of the last couple of hundred that I had to pull, and that's just getting it set up. Once I got it dialed in, it's a lot better at that. But I've had probably 25 rounds that I've had to pull because though there were primers in here, it didn't actually feed one. They got hung up in here and it didn't feed a primer. So I had a loaded round minus the primer in the bottom. And of course that just spills powder everywhere. And you really don't want to prime a loaded round after that. So I ended up pulling the bullets and starting over. So that's how that system works. It does seem to work better with a bunch of primers in here. It seems to usually have the problems when there's just 3 or 4 left in here, so you may have to top it up. The other thing I want to show you is, here's the priming mechanism again. You can see it in there. And I'm going to pull out the actual piece that primes right here. And this is the piece that gets pushed up by the lever. And it's got this spring on it. This spring likes to get all bent around in there and bind things up. When it binds things up, it makes this rod stick in the partially up position, which will either bind up the entire press if it's in a case, if this is up into the primer pocket in a case, or it will just simply stick there at just the level where it won't bind up the press, and it'll keep things running, but it won't drop down low enough to pick up another primer. And that's where I had a lot of the issues in the get-go. So this spring actually has to sit on a specific little nub inside the bottom of this thing. And if it's not sitting there, you won't have good snapback pushing this priming piece back down so that it can catch another primer. Okay, so let's stick this in here and I will see if I can show you how to test it to make sure that it snaps back in place. So let me get rid of the primer tray here and actually put this arm down on, and I'm going to try to line that spring up and come down on it as straight as I possibly can. Alright, so now I'm going to move this up and down a couple of times to make sure it snaps back down. Then what I'm going to do is I'm holding this piece down. I'm going to stick my screwdriver in there and hold the priming piece up. See that? How it didn't snap back down? If something binds up, this whole thing gets off course and the priming piece won't pop back down into its recess in the press. Okay, there it's back down. Okay, let's try that again. Okay. Let's put a little side tension on it, and there it snaps back down. So that spring is in there correctly now. If it gets bound up like that, you want it to snap right back down in with kind of a bit of force. So I'm going to bind it, and then, all right, so that spring is correct now, so that it should move back down all the way so it can catch the next primer. Let me go ahead and put this shell keeper arm back in here. The center of this press ram is actually what holds the spent primers, which is a little different. I'd like to get a drop tube to replace that, but that's not, this press really isn't set up for doing that. Finally got that screw started. And yeah, I'm having to come at the screw from an angle, which is never ideal because you'll end up stripping it out. Okay, so I want this screw and all these others tight enough that I can move this arm, but I've got to put a little pressure on it to do so. So that's perfect right there. And let me give it just a tiny bit more. Okay. So that will hold the priming system in, and so will that little bit. I think we're ready to get this thing actually assembled and run some cases through. So, to put it back together, we're going to stick the shell plate under the guide of, or under the case actuation part of this priming system and back down over. And I want to get it lined up, a slot in the shell holder with the actual case feed area. Then I'll put my shell ejector on there, the O-ring on top, and then I will screw this nut in place. This nut is knurled, and it will let you crank it down way tighter than you need to. You just want to have a little firmness here. Because there's no bearing in here and it's just spinning on a shaft, if you tighten this too much, the whole thing will bind up and you'll not be able to move it. So you definitely want to be able to rotate the shell holder under it. If you have it too tight, it's just going to, yeah, it's going to bind everything up. Everything on this press, because of the design, is trying to bind all of the time. And you have to get everything dialed in just right in order to keep things from binding. Okay, now let's put our indexing rod back in. And I'm probably using the wrong terms for just about everything here, so don't mind that. Okay, so let's run it through a couple of cycles. All right. That seems fine right there. And normally when I take this apart and clean it, I would add, you know, and I'm going to loosen that up just a tad. I would add some oil or some grease. Okay, we have got indexing. Trying to think of what else we need to talk about with it all torn apart. Okay, I'm going to leave the case feed system off for a while, and I'll just replace the entire thing with my finger, and we'll show you how it works. All right, we have zoomed out just a little bit here. So I'm going to put this whole tool head into the press. It does line itself up with a bolt that comes through the actual head of the press through here, and it lines up right in these grooves in here, and there is one that's deeper than all the rest, so you know right where to put it. I will say that the groove is not in the exact right place, and the actual holes that are drilled through this cast aluminum tool head are not exactly they're not exactly straight. So we'll talk about that more in just a second, because it actually throws a few monkey wrenches in our works. All right, I'm going to open my brass bucket up here and grab a couple of cases to mess with. These have been tumbled, but they are still primed. They haven't been sized, any of that. So let's talk about tool positions. In the first position here, I have a universal decapping pin. That is normally, the decapping pin is normally in the sizing die, but the reason we can't really put the sizing die in the first position is we actually need it in the second position. That's because unlike most presses that prime when you get to the bottom of the stroke, this press actually primes at the top of the stroke. Because of where that lever is, it pushes the priming pin up from the bottom when you get to the top. And you need pressure down on the shell plate when you prime to make sure that your primers are seating to a consistent depth. And really the only die that actually contacts the shell holder in this setup is the sizing die. So we need to have support over that position with the sizing die, but of course we can't have the decapping pin in as it's being primed from underneath. Otherwise we would end up with a big old boom, and we don't want that. So the sizing die is in the second position here with the decapping pin removed, and we've got the universal decapping die in the first position. It is really important to get your decapping pin down far enough. I almost had a catastrophic event with this press because I didn't have my decapping die pin sticking far enough out of here, and it was decapping 99% of cases, but I had one where it got the primer most of the way out, but not all the way, and it advanced to the next position and seated it tried to seat a fresh primer on top of the old primer, and it squished everything down, bound up the press, and I wasn't quite used to the force it took to move this lever yet, so I couldn't tell that it was a weird force, and I had a fresh primer that was all crumpled up inside here, and I could have had an explosion. Thankfully I didn't, and I got everything fixed so it's not doing that anymore. But what I had to do is get that decapping pin so where it is sticking quite a ways down out of here. It is the actual die is screwed to where it is not touching the shell holder. It's not touching the shell plate in here, I can see, but it is close, probably like 2 millimeters away. Again, the only die that's actually supposed to touch the shell plate is the sizing die. Okay, so we've covered the decapping die, the sizing die. This right here that you see on top is the Lee Auto Drum Powder Measure. This press came with the Lee Auto Disc Powder Measure. I was not able to get a precise enough charge with this to load my pet load for 9mm. As you guys know, I like to use 5.2 grains of CFE pistol. I could load either 5.4 or 4.9, and that was just not a close enough range. Because you can see here, each of these holes are a different size, so you line it up for where you want it. Then it just fills the hole in this disc with powder and drops it through the drop tube when it gets to this side. If I had a charge that actually lined up with this would work great. And yes, I probably could drill out one of them just a little bit, or do something to increase it by a couple of tenths of a grain in one of these positions, but that wasn't the solution I was looking for. I want to be able to adjust. I want to pretty much have an infinite adjustment. That's why I switched to the auto drum. And since I'm talking about it, I should probably show it to you here. This thing actually meters powder very well. Here's the box for it. It meters powder very well. I found it to be really consistent so far, and it's pretty inexpensive. This whole setup, I think, was under $50. I really didn't want to spend any more on this setup because this is a budget setup, and I had already spent $260 on it, and that's kind of what I wanted to spend. But I could not do what I wanted to do with this press without this piece, or another case-actuated powder meter. The die that it's connected to is a powder-through expanding die. You guys know that when you load 9mm or any other straight-walled case, after you size, you've got to flare out the neck a little bit. The die that the powder goes through actually flares the neck at the same time. And when the shell goes up in fact, let me show you that here. I should be able to slip in one case. When the shell goes up and in, you can see when it, just watch the movement of this here. Nothing happens when there's no shell under it. But when you actually have a shell in that position, it turns this up here and dispenses your powder charge. Alright, the last die is the seating die, and you dial that in just like any other seating die. So there's 4 stations here. There is room for a 5th, and I could put a crimping die in there, but I actually am crimping with this seating die as well, with 9mm. Just putting a little bit of a taper crimp on here. So, let me do a dry run. Let's run one shell through the entire press setup with no powder, no primer, no bullets, no anything, and just watch how everything works. So, I'm going to slide the case into that first position, raise it up. Alright, I think I have that in there close enough that you can see. This is not perfectly lined up, so when I go up, it actually moves the shell a little bit to get that pin aligned with the flash hole. And that's not ideal, but this hole that goes through the press is not straight. And yes, I took every die out and moved them one position to try just a different hole for the decapping pin. No, none of them are quite straight. You can buy a precision machined tool holder for this thing, but that'll run you another $60. It may be worth it in the future, but again, this is a budget build. I didn't want to have to do that. So when you press up, it deprimes. The primer actually drops through this and is actually held in the center of the ram here. This ram is not solid, but it's hollow. Then there is and we'll look at this maybe a little bit later. There's a floor plate on the bottom of the ram that you can empty the primers out after a while. Okay, so let's pull this out and make sure it knocked out the primer. And it did. I'm going to do that again so you guys can see it here. Alright, so I'll slide it in there. We'll deprime. Then as I push down, it advances to the next position, and I'm going to try to do this really slowly so you can see. As it goes past the priming tool here, it opens the priming arm, and gets into that position. Then we'll go up into the sizing die, and this is the part that takes just a little bit of force. This pin right here pushes the priming arm back closed, so a primer is positioned under there and it's sized all at the same time. So it's sized and the primer is inserted in that step. We'll come down to the next position, and I'm moving really slowly so that you can see, and also so that the shells don't fly out because I don't have these arms closed. Then when we come up this next time, we'll get primer dispensed in and the case flared. Then we'll come down to the next position under the seating die. We'll put a bullet on. I'm going to take this off for now because I actually don't want to load this case. We'll go up, it'll go into the seating die and get just a tiny bit of a taper crimp. And come down. Then it'll go up into an empty station. And now when I press it down again, it'll shoot the shell out to the side. I do have a bin and a bin holder that both come with the press that sit up on the side of it here. Yeah, right there. And these catch the shells as they pop out. All right, I think that pretty much covers each station in depth. Let's get the actual case feed system put back together and we'll talk about that a little bit. All right, so the case feed system works on a slider bar that sticks in over here and a couple of plastic spacers and slides and pieces here. This isn't one of those plastic writing on, I think this bar is fiberglass coated. Actually, no, this is a painted metal bar here. I'm assuming it's mild steel. So this is another one of those plastic writing on metal situations that I don't particularly like about this press. But it does work, and I think replacement parts are fairly inexpensive. So let's get this put together. You actually have to slide the bar down through here. Then this has a track on the bottom that goes over this part in our press. So we'll slide that on. Once it's to the right position, I'll slide the bar into its hole down here in the press, and I'll tighten this bolt to hold it in. And yes, I am too lazy right now to get a 7/16 socket, so I'm using a crescent wrench. As you do this, you kind of got to be careful because it tries to twist this guide bar, and then you'll have things binding up even more. All right, let me find the 7/16 socket. Here we are. Now we've got the right tool for the job. Okay, you see how it tries to twist that whole thing as I tighten this bolt? So you kind of got to hold it in place and get it to be straight there. And it doesn't have to be super tight. You just got to be able to hold this thing in place without it moving. Okay, so you can see that's plastic writing on metal. But let me show you how the case feed system works. So, as you start the upstroke, we'll actually put on the case feeder head in a second here. But as you start the upstroke, the case is in that position and it pushes it into the press, into the shell plate. As you come up, it pops back and out of the way, and it goes up into the decapping die. Sometime back here, it's picking up another case. So as you push it down, you index, then you get the next one fed in. All right, let me run those cases around just enough that I can pull them out here, and we'll get those out of the way. All right, this may be easier to see from the opposite side of the press. So we've got a shell right there, and we've actually got a shell sitting up here as well, waiting to drop down into this location, but I'll pull that away for a second. So as you start the press up, it pushes the shell in and then pulls the feeder arm back. We'll go up into the decapping pin, come back out. At this point, it's picking up another case back here. So we'll go down. It'll index. Then as you pull the lever back down, it'll shove another case in there. And it'll go up and we'll index again. And again, everything here is trying to bind. So I'm actually feeling when it gets to right there, a little bit of a bind because it's trying to torque this piece up and around in a direction it doesn't want to go. I think this piece says not to use any lubricant on it. I absolutely put some lubricant on, and you'll need some lubricant on this as well. Okay, now let me put the shell feeder head in place and we'll watch it that way. I've got this dialed into where I want it. The manual calls for setting a coin on top of here to space things out while you set it up. I've already got this nut where I want it, so I'm going to stick it down right there. And actually I think it moved a little bit because I want this down a little further. And you can adjust it by eyeballing it from the side here. But we just want a little space in between the bottom of this piece and the actual slide. Again, to keep things from binding up. And we'll thread on this nut. I'm going to line it up so that the case feed part is directly over the slide. And I'll tighten that up with my 7/16 wrench. So now without the tubes in place, let me stick a couple shells in. Right in there, and we'll watch how the feed system is working. It is hitting the press at the top of the stroke right there, as you can see, but I don't think it's actually going to hurt anything. I may be able to, let's see if I can, there we go. I got this twisted out of the way just a little bit, trying not to make it bind up with the slide right here. So yeah, it's hitting the top, just barely rubbing, but I don't think it's a problem. All right, let's add one more thing, the tube there. All right, I don't think that's gonna bind too bad. So let's just stick some cases in and run them through the press. Again, no powder or primers or anything. Make sure everything's working. All right, picks up the case there at the top of the stroke. A little more effort there because it's sizing. And I'll get my bin on here to catch stuff when it shoots out. I've got to get these case retainer arms pressed in, but we'll do that in a second. Okay, we've got all 5 stations loaded now. So we'll go through and you can see it's actuating primer. It's actuating the powder each time. And we'll run it down. Okay, so it should be all set up to go. Let me get some primers in the press over here and some powder up in the jug up here and get the powder system primed, and then we'll actually do some loading. This powder system is a little bit tricky and I don't care for it. I wish that this hopper from the auto disc was on here. This is set up so that you can actually take your 1 pound jug of powder and screw it directly into this thing. As it sits, you have to actually pop this out of the press, and it's got an on-off valve here. So we're gonna make sure it's set to off. Then I'll dump powder in my can. I wish that you could just pop off the cap and dump it in while it was all on the press. But because it's set up to actually take a powder bottle, you can't do that. I'm using an 8 pound jug, and that obviously will not work. Way too big of a mouth opening, and I wouldn't want to just have my whole 8 pound jug of powder inverted on here anyway. So let's see if I can dump some in the can without, yeah, I spilled some. All right, we're just gonna do about that much for now because I'm probably only gonna load 25 or 50 rounds tonight. All right, then we'll thread this part on. Again, make sure that this valve is closed, and we'll invert it and line it up, put it on here, and then we'll actually twist it in the direction that it says on here to open the powder flow. I'm going to give it a couple taps to fill up the drum. And yes, this whole thing does wiggle around on top of here, but that's really no problem. Let's get some primers in the tray. So we'll open the tray. There's already a couple on here. I want several more primers than I think I'm actually going to use. There's no follower in this system. So once you get down to a couple, all you have is the weight of primers to push the next one in. And when there's 3 or 4 left, sometimes you get it to where one primer won't drop down in because there's not enough weight behind it to push it. So let me get several primers in here, flipped. Then we'll close this tray and put it to lock. And make sure it's not, this thing is, I don't like this either. Okay, then we'll push open. No. See, I did it wrong. We'll go to on and tap it here. And our primers have flowed down into this thing, and we should have primers loaded in the press now. I think, oh, we don't want to start loading cases quite yet because I'm going to get the powder charge dialed in. It takes several runs of the case through before you're throwing an accurate powder charge. It hasn't actually been taking that much with this thing. So what I'm going to do, let me bring you in closer here again. So I'm going to keep this thing out of the way. Let's take a, well, let's prime a case. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to hold powder in the bottom of it. So I'll go ahead and feed it through the system here. Okay, we've got a case in. Decapping pin's gone through it. Okay, I heard a primer go into place. That's good. We'll pull it up, size the case, and put the primer in it at the same time. Then we'll go to the next station, which is powder. And you can see I do have a primer seated in there, which is good. Now what I'm going to do, because I'm going to run this through the powder several times and I don't want it indexing, I'm going to pull my indexing rod. You do have to be careful when doing that because this shell plate will still try to spin on you in there. So you got to make sure that it stays lined up with the dies above. Let's get this under the powder and we'll go up into the flare and powder die, come back down. All right, let's weigh that charge. Okay, that first charge was way heavy at 5.4 grains. I'm actually just going to dump a couple of charges back into here. Let me run through 3 or 4 without weighing, and then I'll weigh one and see if we're in the ballpark. Okay, let's weigh one. That one's still just a little heavy at 5.3. I may have to actually adjust my powder measure a little bit. .3 is definitely a safe charge, but I like mine down between 5.1 and 5.2. Okay, that one gave us 5.3 as well. So I guess this gives me a good opportunity to show you how to adjust this auto drum powder measure. It does not have a knob on it that you can twist like a lot of powder measures. It actually comes with this little key that you stick up in here and turn. I think it says 1 flat on the key is supposed to be 1/10 of a grain. I'm not sure what powder they're talking about because each powder has a different density, but we'll go down. Let's start with going down 1/2 of a flat. So I'll pull that out and we'll probably run 2 through here because that first one isn't going to be accurate since I adjusted it while it was in there. All right, I'll weigh this one. Okay, that one reads 5.0. Do the next one. Okay, now I think we're in the ballpark. It's reading 5.1. Okay, we're at 5.1. I think we are ready to go to full progressive loading here. So let me get the camera in an angle where you can see. Oh, one more thing before we go to full progressive, and that is to close these. And you can actually close them a little further than you think, and the case will pop them out. So let me get around to one more here. This one that's right in the powder, or in the priming system. And the next case that goes through there will knock it out to exactly the right level. All right, we'll load just this one round. Oh, I better put my indexing rod back in. Okay, we've got powder. We'll put a bullet on and run it up. Seat it, come down. We'll go one more rotation, and we've got our completed round. Now let me check this for correct overall length. All right, I'm at 1.150, which is exactly what I want. Then I will pop this into a case gauge and make sure everything on it's correct, and then we'll go to full progressive. All right, I'll try to show you this from a couple different angles. Let me drop some cases in the case feeder. And we'll spin it up. Hey, that's enough for now, probably 10 rounds or so. All right, deprime the first one. Prime and size. Okay, we got powder, prime, size, decap, all of that. Okay, I got a case fell out in a weird spot. That's odd. All right, so now we've got a powdered primed case here, and we'll start putting on bullets each time we come around to this position. And let's take a look at our first loaded round on this side, just to make sure we've got primer, the bullets seated right, all of that. Yep, it looks great. All right, let's run these cases through. Every round I load on this progressive press, I do put through a case gauge afterwards. Okay, we've gone through all of the cases I had loaded up here, and we'll run it down. All right, and there you have it, just that quick. 10. Actually, there are 11 rounds there of loaded ammo. You can see how much quicker we can go from brass, caps in it. All that's been done to it so far since it came off the range has been tumbled. We can go right from this to loaded ammo in just a couple of minutes. And I can run 100 rounds in this press easily once I have it set up, powder and everything in it, in 10 minutes. And it's no problem at all to do that. All right, I've got some more primers in here. I definitely have enough powder. Let me put you at this angle and we'll run through from this way to see if you can see a little more. I will mention while we're on this side, there are 3 other tubes that come with, and those go in these slots here, and you can fill them up with cases as well. And then when one tube is out, you just rotate the whole thing to the next position, and the next tube of cases drops down in, and you've got that feeding. So I'll take these out of the way just for visualization, and we'll run it up again here. On this, once you have it run up, on each stroke, you're feeling for something that feels, sounds different. And if you get something that just feels wrong, like you're having to put too much pressure on it, like it's binding up, stop. There is no reason to keep going and blow yourself up. It's just not worth it. All right, there you guys go. That is my look at the Lee Loadmaster progressive press. So bottom line here, when it comes down to it, knowing what I know now, would I buy this press setup again? Knowing that it's going to take hours to get everything dialed in the way I like it. It's going to be finicky as all get out, and things are going to bind up like crazy if you don't have everything tweaked just the right way. The answer is yes, I would buy this thing again. And in fact, I probably will get the tool head set up and do 223 on it as well. There's just no match for progressive loading as far as speed goes, especially for loading high volume, not super high precision pistol ammo or 223 ammo or whatever that you want to have just for target practice to run through guns. And this ammo is actually very consistent as far as velocities go. The charge weights that this auto drum measure throws have been really consistent for me so far. I have had no problems with overcharges or undercharges. Running this ammo over the chronograph, I get just as tight of standard deviation and extreme spread and all that as I get when throwing them with my Hornady powder measure over here. Trying to think of anything else I want to tell you guys about this press. If there's anything that I did not get a close enough detail to and you guys want to see more, let me know and I can do another video on that. I know if I had been able to see this video before I set this up, it would have been a whole lot easier for me. So I hope that it helps somebody out there. One thing I'll throw in quick, and you might have seen it if you were paying close attention, this ball at the end of the handle came to me broken in 3 pieces. It was shattered. So I glued it back together and didn't do a very good job of it at that. But you can see it's on there now and it works just fine. I'm not worried about it. I think there's a roller handle upgrade for this that I'll probably get at some time just to make things easier so that ball is not rubbing in your palm all the time. Because I do plan to make runs where I load 1,000 rounds at a time. And it's a little uncomfortable when you're pushing on this all of the time. You can get a bullet feeder set up for this press. I don't plan to do that at all. It only takes one hand to run this. I might as well set bullets on with my other hand. It's not that big of a hassle, and I've heard, as with everything on this press, the bullet feeder setup is a little bit finicky and you can wind up with some binds. I think that's all I have to talk about for now on this press. Guys, as I mentioned, at 250 subscribers, I said I was going to open a Patreon account. It is there. It's the Outdoor Generalist on Patreon, just like on YouTube. I'll put a link in my YouTube bio so that you can get there. If you want to chip in any amount, it would be helpful for powder tests, bullet tests, all that in all the calibers that I shoot, and to probably help me expand to a couple other calibers. I'm really interested in the 6mm arc that has come out. I've been wanting to do a 6mm Grendel or 243 LBC or something like that for quite a while, and I just haven't done it because I'd have to form my own brass for it, and I really wasn't quite ready to get into that yet. But now that Hornady has come out with the 6mm arc, there will be commercial brass available, which just opens things wide up, and I will be glad to dive into that. But that'll take some money to get either a bolt-action gun for it or to get an AR upper. Of course, reloading dies, powder, bullets, all of that stuff that reloading takes. So if you guys would be willing to jump over there to Patreon and chip in, I would certainly be grateful for that. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and y'all have a good one. Thanks for watching.